sisters, the Guardian picket that we organise every year is always a lively event, and we see on the streets how much support there is for Julian Assange. We see it in all the beeps and all the comments that we receive. And we know where there is not support for Julian Assange, which is in that building in the headquarters of the so-called liberal Guardian. It appears that every year when we come here, there is some new ghastly expose of the Guardian's lies, slanders, smears, and everything else it can think of to besmirch the name of Julian Assange. This building and the editorial staff within this institution are at the very heart of the darkness of the US and UK persecution of Julian Assange. We know that Emmy has talked about Mint Press News's expose of what the Guardian, 3 articles that the Guardian published in 2018. And we are here to say to the Guardian that your journalism has had consequences. It has meant that Julian Assange was forced from his asylum. It meant he was taken into custody. It meant he has spent every long day of 2.5 years inside Belmarsh maximum security prison. You, the Guardian, play a large part in that. You take a very big share of that responsibility for making those events happen. Mint Press News showed us last week that the Guardian story that was published in 2018 about the alleged plan to cooperate with Russia for Julian Assange to escape from the Ecuadorian embassy was complete lies from start to finish. It had no basis in truth whatsoever. The Guardian reported that Assange's escape was aborted on Christmas Eve. They made it up. It was a lie. And the story, of course, came when Russiagate was in full swing and when Trump was being accused of collaborating with Russia to win the election. And the authors noted, they said that this raises questions about Assange's ties to the Kremlin. He had no ties to the Kremlin. And of course, it raised in the public mind the issue of whether Julian Assange was a supporter of President Trump, that fascist. He was not. The story was very, very serious attack on Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. Fidel Narvarrete, who was the consul, formerly the consul at the Ecuadorian embassy, complained to the Guardian, made a formal complaint, and the Guardian was forced to amend the article to say it had given a misleading impression. It had not simply given a misleading impression, it was a pack of lies directed at, and at the behest, I have no doubt, of the intelligence services to get Assange out of the embassy and into the hands of the US and US state. Now, the main journalist on that article, Kirk Gaisner, I think her name is, knew that a security company, UC Global, hired to protect the embassy, was in fact filming, recording, and doing everything in its power to harass the visitors coming in to see Julian Assange, taking their phones apart, looking at all their private lives and harassing them. Harassing the lawyers of Julian Assange and recording their meetings. None of us knew that. We suspected it, but we did not know it. But apparently, a Guardian journalist in 2018 knew it. but did not care to tell us, did not care to say there's a very dangerous situation developing in that embassy. His lawyers' meetings are being recorded. Instead, she contacted UC Global and said, could you get me a transcript of that meeting that was held inside the embassy? And UC Global said, yeah, okay, we'll send it to you tomorrow. And she said, oh, great. And that was before it was publicly known in Spain, in the court case, and in the newspapers, that was happening in the embassy. That CIA spying operation. What kind of journalist knows that that's happening in the embassy and doesn't write a story about it, but writes a fake story? Well, I can only tell you that she's their Washington correspondent. And I imagine she's fed a great deal of stuff in Washington by the intelligence services. The escape story, as we now know from some factual investigation by Yahoo News, caused absolute panic in the US and British intelligence services. And they stepped up and speeded up their plans to get Assange out of the embassy. Their plans were up to and including kidnapping, poisoning, murdering, and whatever steps were necessary to get him out of the embassy. And alongside that, the legal preparations in the USA to extradite him were speeded up. Those were the consequences of a Guardian journalist, a set of journalists, writing a story. And that is a consequence we live with today. But most importantly, it's a consequence that Julian Assange sits in a cell living with. So journalism has consequences. This bunch of lies, of course, came one before and one after two other bunches of lies. There was a story published in The Guardian by the same journalist, Kergesner, Dan Collins, and Luke Harding. Luke Harding. We've got a special placard for Luke Harding telling him he's in the wrong job. There's vacancies at MI6. And also a journalist, well, he's not a journalist, called Fernando Villavicencio. This story came in May 2018, revealing, according to The Guardian,
I think it was quite
with security in the embassy to protect Julian Assange. This is when they knew what was going on in the embassy. A CIA-backed operation was taking place, but The Guardian portrayed it as a costly operation to protect Julian Assange. It set the stage for the betrayal by The Guardian of Assange as a pampered house guest, as they called him. They called him a pampered house guest, a man who was in the end not able to communicate, receive visitors, or do anything but live in two small rooms under surveillance. They call that being a pampered house guest. I bet it's not the kind of pampering the journalists in there get. They earn plenty of money telling lies. In November, again, Luke Harding and Dan Collins, another fabricated story that Paul Manafort, as Emmy has told us today, Trump's campaign manager, had visited Assange at the embassy. That story is still up on their website. They have removed various names on it, but that story is still up on their website. And that's why we come here. We come here to say your stories cost lives. Your stories ensure injustice. Your stories take away our democratic rights. Now, the name that they removed from that article was Villavicencio's, and it was removed not because of any kind of accuracy, because I've no doubt he was partly behind the story. It was removed because he was exposed as a CIA, National Endowment for Democracy funded operative throughout Latin America and in Ecuador. That's why they removed his name, because it looked really bad. It looked bad, so we won't keep that on there. But the lie stayed on there. The idea that Paul Manafort could visit the most heavily surveilled building in the world, I would imagine at that point, and not be filmed, and there'd be no evidence of his visit, and that he should deny it, and that everybody else should deny it, has not been enough to get that story taken down. Why? We must ask why. More than any other media outlet, The Guardian has weaponised mainstream liberal opinion against Assange. Very shortly after they published the WikiLeaks work, which they made a very good living from, they began a concerted campaign to destroy Julian Assange, his work and his popularity. And this was under the editorship of Alan Rusbridger. Rusbridger, who now claims to be against Julian's extradition, was editor for 5 years while smear after smear was produced. For 10 years, The Guardian have called Julian every name under the sun. A narcissist, should go to Sweden for extradition, is an immensely difficult character, and refused to redact the cables, which we know is untrue. There's a vast amount of evidence showing that Julian Assange, above all others, spent much time redacting the cables that were leaked to remove individual names. So again, another lie. And we heard the fake feminists going on and on about Sweden, knowing nothing about it, caring nothing about it. And in fact, they are so almost psychopathic that one of them tweeted when she saw a picture of Julian with his newborn son, "It made me want to go and vomit." What kind of person would say that? What kind of journalist would say that? So, I just want to end with a contrast. Picture this. Whilst Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have stood their ground, have pioneered new forms of journalism that reveal the truth, he has lost his liberty for 11 years and suffered immensely. What did The Guardian do when the British government, after they had printed some of Snowden's leaks, when the British government threatened them, what do you think they threatened them with? Prison? No. Did they threaten them with torture? No. They threatened them with an injunction. We're going to serve an injunction on you, they said. And The Guardian went into hysterics to the point that on the 20th of July 2013, in this building, under the staff and editors of The Guardian, under the supervision of GCHQ, the spy centre, smashed up the hard drives containing Snowden's leaks. The security men lent them an angle grinder and they chopped it into pieces. They chopped the hard drives up. They did that in such a symbolic way to say we don't care about the freedom of the press. And it contrasts with what Julian and WikiLeaks have done for the public and have done for democratic rights and have done for the flow of information that we need to know. So I would end by saying it's said that we live in an age of illusion, and that's very true, I think. But the biggest illusion is that we have some democracy. That's the biggest illusion. We don't have democracy here. We have, and throughout the world, there is an attack going on democratic rights, and in the forefront of that is the attack on journalism, on a free press. We know that throughout the world, the poverty, the suffering of people is immense. If you just take the figure, 1% of humanity owns half of the world's wealth. The top 20% own 94.5%. 80% of humanity gets by on the remaining 4.5%. That is not sustainable. That causes rebellion. It causes people to demand democracy and demand what they deserve, which is a decent way to live. And that will be met and is met by repression. And we know that the imperialist wars our government has waged in pursuit of protecting the billionaires have caused disaster, displacing 34 million people in the Middle East. We see the victims of that in the British Channel on a plastic dinghy drowning. That's where we see close up the victims. It appears to me that bursting the illusion of democracy by telling the truth is one of the greatest sins you can commit, and that is the sin that Julian Assange is being persecuted for. And not one of the Guardian people commits that sin. They are safe and sound, snug and warm. Russ Bridger is now head of the Reuters Institute for Journalism. Reuters, whose overseas development manager is a 30-year veteran of the CIA. Fine company for the former editor of The Guardian. Those fighting for the future are in the firing line. It's up to us to join them, support them, struggle with them, and today that means fighting for the freedom of Julian Assange.
Free Julian Assange!
Free